programs and user experience at the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library. Tonight, we have another great program in store for you. Balarama's new book, Eyes on the Horizon, My Journey Toward Justice, is what we'll be delving into in a few moments. You'll also have the opportunity to buy your own copy for $30, cash only, I'm sorry, following the program, as well as have it signed by the author himself. I'd like to thank Kayi at HarperCollins Canada for helping making tonight's program possible. And now let me take a few moments to introduce the two people you'll be hearing from tonight, Idil Issa and Balarama Holness. Idil Issa is the co-founder of Mouvement Montréal and FemCorps, has worked in the startup and nonprofit space in Qatar, Malaysia, South Africa, and Canada. She writes frequently for outlets such as the Globe and Mail, Esquire Malaysia, Colors Magazine, and Maisonneuve Magazine, among others, on issues including race, religion, and gender. She appears regularly on media outlets such as CBC and CTV to advocate for the rights of marginalized and oppressed groups with a focus on the intersectional experiences of Muslim women of color. Originally from Montreal, Balarama Holness is an activist, social entrepreneur, and a former defensive back for the Montreal Alouettes, with whom he won the Grey Cup in 2010. He completed his Bachelor's of Civil Law and his Juris Doctor with an interest in constitutional law at McGill University. As a community organizer and activist, he promotes citizen involvement in key issues such as systemic racism, justice, equality, and inclusion. The founder of Mouvement Montréal, a municipal political party, he ran for mayor of Montreal. So here are Idil Issa and Balarama Holness.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm gonna get this started. So Balarama and I have known each other for quite some time, but reading this book actually gave me insight into things that I didn't know about Balarama. So it's always an interesting experience when you know somebody and then you read their autobiography and you learn about different aspects of their story. I'm going to start off with a quote that really stuck with me. So you write in your book that reaching a new level of spirituality required sacrifice, concentration, inner fortitude, trust, and dedication. This was in reference to a sweat lodge experience you had at the age of 8 years old, where you realized that your thoughts had the ability to empower you and that you needed to harness that power for good. How do you sense that this insight has played out throughout your life? And where have you drawn on this mental strength in your journey?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a great question just to start us off. Very, very thoughtful. It's quite interesting. I start the book off by describing how my parents met, which is at this Bob Marley concert in 1979. And for those of you who are music lovers, particularly reggae and a sense of Jamaica, it's an extremely powerful country with deep connections to spirituality. And this is the basis of the connection between my parents. And my father, who was deeply connected to spirituality, falls in love with Hinduism, and hence the name Balarama and my brother Jagannatha. And for the first 9 years of my life, I live in an ashram, which is effectively, a spiritual boarding school, if you will. So the event in the sweat lodge where I tap into my spirituality to deal with this particular circumstance is really a microcosm of a broader, I would say, culture of my life, which is really anchored in spirituality. And why is that important? Is because I never discuss this in today's day and age in regards to politics. But you kind of wonder, is like, how come this person is so resilient? How come he ran for mayor of Montreal North, then mayor of Montreal, then Bloc Montreal, and goes to McGill Law, place where he Alouettes. And when you're in politics, there's all kinds of haters, to be frank, to speak colloquially. But how come this person is so resilient? And really, it's because of my spiritual roots that guide and anchor me throughout my life. And that particular instance is a kind of a flash, but it speaks to a larger point where from the age of 0 to 10, it's really an essence of who I am. And as you know, there's a few children in the room. I'll make one more comment on that. Is for the first 10 years of my life, I have a very unorthodox education. So you know how we tell all kids, you know, sit down, do your math homework, read and write, and don't leave the classroom. And my education was not at all like this for the first 10 years of my life. We were reading and writing, but it was more so go find some leaves and analyze what kind of leaf this is. And it was like botany and like building tree houses to see how many birds would come and identify the birds. Really atypical. So it's a mix of spirituality and also a way to view education completely differently. It kind of, you know, over time paid off, if you, for lack of a better term.
Thank you for that. And I'm just wondering, in terms of that mental fortitude, if you were to counsel a young person who wanted to develop a similar mental fortitude, not everybody can go to an ashram and go to a sweat lodge. How would a young person be able to kind of take from that lesson in that sweat lodge, where you really were alone with yourself and kind of had a moment of clarity in terms of mental strength?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like in the moment in the sweat lodge, it's more a question of survival than having mental fortitude. And this is a kind of an important point that I'll connect to another point, is that if you, for example, have a bear in front of you, what's your first instinct? Is run. Like, that's how you die. Because the bear runs faster than a horse, and it's going to catch you. The only thing you could do is to have the inner strength to stand your ground and to yell at the bear and ensure that the bear scatters off. So when I'm in the sweat lodge, it's not that I have this mental fortitude. It's that if I'm going to survive this, I better calm down. Because if I panic, then that's where things can go wrong. So I think that, you know, I would give myself a little less credit to say that it's not so much I have mental fortitude. It's that I am in a lot of high pressure situations where the only choice I have is to fight. So I'm on a debate stage against Denis Coderre, Valérie Plante, for example. It's high pressure, but the only choice I have is to rise to the occasion. You have no other choice. It's the same thing if you're applying to McGill Law. It's the same thing if you are trying to get into the CFL. It's the same thing if you are in a race. I used to run, you know, track and field. You have no other choice but to survive in that circumstance. So it's not just mental fortitude, it's a question of survival and being able to thrive in that instance. Otherwise, you crumble and you fail. And on a side note, I don't talk about this in the book, but I'll tell you, like, I procrastinate a lot and I sleep really good. So it kind of seems like I do a lot of stuff, but it's more, if I'm in a high pressure situation, I could rise to the occasion. And apart from that, I am just like everyone else. And I would tell young people is to, or not even young people, my father's 7 years old and still very active. It's putting yourself in high pressure situations. And by default, you will rise to the occasion, just like a bear in front of you.
Thank you. So now I want to talk a little bit about your origin story. So you referenced briefly how your parents met at a Bob Marley concert. You really are from a background that is diverse. So your mother is a Quebecois woman and your father's Jamaican. So just kind of focusing in on your mother, who you call Mata in the book. I just kind of, and you know, I'm kind of indulging myself because I read the book and was able to kind of pick the questions I love most. So I was intrigued by your mention of how she established a meditation center in Montreal called Serenity and Awakening. So for me, that struck me as really entrepreneurial in a way. And you linked her absences when you were young to the fact that she was kind of establishing and doing some of the groundwork to make sure that the Serenity and Awakening Center was opened. So do you think some of this community building and institution founding rubbed off on you? Or was your desire to build institutions such as Montreal en Action, Mouvement Montréal, and Bloc Montréal, was that something more innate to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so you're very observant. Good job. Good analysis. There's one sentence in my book, and I speak about, and I added this later on, and it was pivotal, is that my mother had an ability to mobilize people. And whether we like it or not, we are an amalgamation of our parents, right? This is just the science of it. And certainly we try to do, go above and beyond what our parents have done, but we are a creation of our parents. And my mother was able not just to mobilize people, but an avid adventurer. We were always moving. So she was not only entrepreneurial, but she was always on the go. And it's quite interesting because someone was telling me about, they said, initially I was very surprised, sort of Bloc Montréal, but after reading the book, this must have been like a cup of tea, because my whole life I'm always on the go, I'm always moving. And I guess if you're stuck in a city and you're kind of doing the same routine, to see someone go from local government to provincial government, you're like, you spit your tea out, you say, oh my God, I cannot believe they're making this move. But for us, it's another day. So my mother was not only always moving, she was certainly mobilizing people, but lived a life of adventure. And that's why it's easy for me to call the book A Journey Towards Justice. I could have called it like an adventure towards justice, because it's a constant, continuous journey. And a big quote in the book that I use that you've probably heard before is that justice is a pursuit, not a destination. So you're always going and advancing towards justice. And if you're an adventurer, it kind of works out because you're always on the go, and hence a journey towards justice.
So now that I've kind of asked you a little bit about your mother, I want to also ask you about your father. So something that intrigued me about your story or stories regarding your father was the quote, effortless effort. So you write about how your father had a mantra, effortless effort, which he applied to how life should be lived and how work should be performed. So what does effortless effort mean to you? And how do you think people can apply this principle in their own life?
Yeah, very well done once again. Like, I feel like we should applaud you right away. Like, this is all great questions. Yeah, so it's quite fascinating, right? So say, for example, hey, how are you? Candidate for Montreal. So I just want to, pivot here. Let's just go back to the whole bear analogy. What if I told you that you had to run as fast as you can for 100 meters right now? That kind of be annoying for all of you, right? It would be extremely annoying. But say you had to run because the bear was a centimeter away from you. Because of the high pressure situation, that task would become a lot easier for you because your life depended on it. So effortless effort, effectively, in my situation, it's that because I'm always in these high pressure situations, the work becomes easier. It becomes effortless because once again, it's a question of survival. You kind of have to like marinate on that again. But when the pressure is on, your actions become effortless in many ways because it's a question of survival. So my father says effortless effort, but it's always in the context of high stakes. So if you look at a sprinter, for example, on the 100-meter in slow motion, his cheeks or her cheeks are just flying in the wind, face relaxed, and going as fast as they can. So that's the best example of effortless effort. But when the stakes are high and you care about the issues and you're authentic, it's effortless. And I want to give you an example. When I'm on the debate stage with Denis Coderre and Valérie Plante, I have no notes. I don't have a single note, a single talking point, both French debate and English debate. and it's effortless. I am not nervous. I'm there. I'm standing my ground in front of these bears, if you will. And the fluidity and the ease at which I can communicate my ideas are because the stakes are so high that I genuinely care about the fact that we had, the first question was about a young boy who was killed in front of the school. I genuinely cared about the issue, genuinely cared about housing and all these issues. So the authenticity mixed with the high stakes makes it, and that it just becomes effortless. So, but the stakes need to be high. And that's the only way that I can function. And throughout my book, you kind of see this journey, but the stakes are always really, really high. Do you get into the CFL? Do you get into McGill Law? Do you become mayor of Montreal? And when you set the stakes high, then the actions become that much easier. But say the stakes are low, say there's nothing that you'll lose, it just becomes so difficult to act. So it's always putting yourself in these high pressure situations, and I think that's where the effortless effort comes in. It's very philosophical, but once you read the book, or if you already read the book, you'll see what I mean.
And just to kind of, pour rebondir un peu, just to kind of continue with that. So how would you summarize your father's superior man lesson?
Just again, okay, yeah. The superior man lesson is very interesting. Because we can argue that it also comes from a place of possibly a sense of feeling inferior, right? You don't think about superiority if you're never questioning your place in society. And a Jamaican man from the rolling hills of St. Elizabeth, from a great family in Jamaica, comes to Canada, and all of a sudden he feels marginalized. And when you're marginalized, you're isolated. And when you're isolated, then you begin to question possibly your identity and your place in the world. And then for my father, it no longer becomes his socioeconomic status or his career that becomes important. It's his dignity and his word and his authenticity and his integrity. And then those are the things that he begins to etch in me. So being superior is no longer playing the game of Babylon or playing the game of catching up with the Joneses. Superior becomes who could be the most authentic in the way that they comport themselves, who could be the most loyal. And time and time again, he says, don't let your socioeconomic standing interfere with your moral judgments or with your compass. So ultimately, the way that you act as an individual, between individuals, and in society determine your standing, if you will. And that's very different from, that's really a spiritual and value-based ideal. The way that we determine standing is how new is your Mercedes and how big is your bank account. So we're operating on a completely different bank. And our bank is, when we go to the bank at the end of the week, it's the bank of values, is how honest, how much integrity, how loyal were you to the people around you. And that's where my father comes into play, and then that's where we get our power.
Okay, so there are several moments in your autobiography that are less than pleasant. One of them includes an incident where a young person in Boisbriand told you to have de la boue sur la face. You write that you became numb to the racism you experienced in Quebec. How have you transmuted your youthful experiences of racism into a desire to change what's happening in the present?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, when you're young, particularly young people, when you kind of figure out that you're a minority, it becomes a culture shock. So when I grew up in the ashram, I wasn't aware that I was poor. I wasn't aware that I was a visible minority. But when I came to Canada, to the material world, there's one boy who says, "Oh, you have mud on your face," and then it kind of, that at that point I was numb to it because I didn't call it anywhere prior to that. And then you begin to rebel. So I think what's important, particularly for minorities, if you will, want to call us that, or the visible majority, is that it's okay to be angry and it's okay to rebel. And what I did throughout my life is a continuous rebellion, and that rebellion comes in many different ways, and it became through politics in many different ways. But I think it's important, in my view, to never lay down arms, if you will. And for those of you that read the book, at the beginning, when I begin to rebel, it's negative. So I'm getting into fistfights, I'm falling off track, I'm doing negative things. And then I learn how to cathartically put my energy in the right direction. And what I've done, even the last election, I was very, very honest with the public. So La Presse would ask me a question regarding my language policies, and I would tell them it's a rebellion. And then the headline would be like, Balarama calls his language policy rebellion. Yeah, it's a rebellion. And he used to say that we're a protest party. Yeah, we're protesting. And what's fascinating is that we're putting what I call our intellectual signature on society by telling them we're rebelling, we're protesting. We're not going to stand for your policies that we deem unjust, like your work against Bill 21. So I think it's important to continuously call out the injustice that we see, but it has to be cathartic. What I mean by that is that if you look at both campaigns, I never talk about systemic racism. I'm not here to say that I'm a victim of racism and never talk about that. It's that we are assuming a position of power through empowerment, and we are rebelling in a revolutionary way, like we're trying to win the game, not to say that we are being oppressed by our oppressor, but to say that we're here to, you know, when I signed up for mayor, when I gave my sheet, I said, we're not here to take part, we're here to take over. It's that we're here in an empowering tone. And that's what I hope to translate from the book, where it's not like racism is weighing me down. It's more like we feel empowered by the work that we're doing, and we feel inspired to continue.
Delve more into your theory about education. So you write that education would become my shield and sword that would empower me to improve myself and redesign the world around me. Now, of course, we both know that shield and sword is commonly used as a metaphor within the legal profession. And you speak more about education in the book. You also say, I saw education as a way to mitigate poverty and social exclusion and increase the Black communities, which is to say my community's awareness of the world and its inner workings. Can you elaborate on what you mean and how education has empowered you on your journey?
For sure. Well, first of all, that's also inspired by Nelson Mandela, who said education is the most powerful weapon you could use to change the world. So nothing new under the sun there. But for me, it was, you know, I had a lot of questions, like these existential questions, like, how come people that look like me are more likely to be in prison? Why do we get discriminated? I had all these kind of questions. How come we're underrepresented in parliament? I had all these kind of, you know, how come I'm not in the curriculum? I asked my professor from the University of Ottawa, how come people look like me wasn't in? He had no answer that satisfied me. And then I came to the very simple conclusion that the more education I could attain, the more I could protect myself. For me, it's more as a shield than a sword. It was an ability to possibly get a good paying job one day, an ability to understand the world around me, an ability to articulate my ideas. You know, that was the initial aspect. And I looked at data and it was like, okay, higher education meant that you were more likely to stay with your spouse and more likely to get married. And all these higher correlations with income, all these correlations, you know, and coming from a broken home, not growing up around my parents, there was this, you know, maybe if I get well educated, I could like have a family and go live in a nice big house and like in Westmount or something, you know. So that was really the basis of it. And what also dawned on me over time is that as a lifelong learner, I would be stimulated through learning. So on a little side note, I'm studying for the bar and I had 2 exams and I've been studying 24/7. And then after my second exam, I was studying for 3 days and I got bored. I was like, oh, I'm gonna study because it was intellectually stimulating. So and I figured that out like a week ago. I was like, how come I just like, so it's not just a shield and sword. Learning is stimulating to me. And I guess I get that from my father, who's very bookish. And I grew up around a whole bunch of books and more books and more books. So all I have to say is that education comes from a place of vulnerability. It's not because I'm smart and I have all these degrees. It's because I'm trying to protect myself. And my worldly fantasy is that all people of color who feel oppressed would go out and just go to the library and just, or whether if you're a musician, go into the studio, or whether you're an actor, you don't leave the theater. And this is where the kicker comes into play. Well, I don't even think I put this in the book, but this is where the kicker comes into play. Is that what is the percentage of systemic racism that the onus should be on us for us to correct? What that means is that at what point in time do we say, I'm not going to blame whether it's the police, whether it's the employer, whether it's the landlord, whether it's the state, like what percentage is the onus on us? It can't be 100% onus on the state. It can't be. What percentage? But no other persons can answer that but us. Because if your oppressor says, oh, 40% is, you know, me, 6%, no, that's just inappropriate. But I think at one point we have to decide to say, okay, what if we think 100% onus is on us? That just means that you don't leave the library. That just means that you don't leave the studio. And that's what like the blueprint I've done in my life is effectively that. Like people, unless you're my official agent, Anastasia, like no one else is gonna see me because I'm just studying 24/7. I'm 39 years old and I will not leave my house unless it's like to feed my baby or it's to like sign some documents that need tending to. But I feel as though my book is a blueprint for an educational revolution that can solve a lot of our issues. And I'll give you one quick story about that. My father's at a conference and this concerned mother stands up and says, my sons were minding their own business at the corner and the cops came to stop them. And my father says, what business did they have at the corner? And even though there could be racist police officers, even though there's no after-school programs, even though, you know, the landlord discriminated the mother and she lives in a 3.5-bedroom apartment and the kids need to be outside. Regardless of all these things, when we think that the onus is on us, that is when things start to shift. And that's when you empower yourself to run for mayor of Montreal. That's where you empower yourself to do all kinds of things. And yeah, and to conclude on that is that in the book, I don't always put, I put 1 + 1, but people have to figure out the algorithm to get to 2 or whatever. So I kind of lay these foundations from education to democracy, and I laid this blueprint, but I never create a point like I shared with you now to try to prove a given theory. It's that people can come to those own conclusions themselves or go into another direction. That's what's interesting about the book is that I don't try to prove a political point or a theory like I just gave you now. It's when you put the things together, you can create your own algorithm and then you'll lead to your particular view. But that's a personal opinion that I have. And we can talk about that after. I'm sure you have questions and challenges on that.
So now I'm going to turn to your decision-making process. So you mentioned in your book, I knew my judgment, like hers, and your mother's, was based on a mix of instinct and spirituality. If I listened to my heart, I could not lose. So we just spoke about education, and our education system is very much based on, scientific method, rationality. If you write a paper, you have to reference every point that you make, footnote it. So this is a different type of decision-making process, based on instinct and spirituality. So how do you use spirituality and instinct to make decisions, and how has it benefited you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a quick side note, so these are like the best questions I've had, and I've interviewed by a lot of different papers. And that's the hard part, is because there are people who are, say, global majorities who don't always get the same opportunities as others. So if you compared like these questions I've had versus all the other questions I got from like popular newspapers, like it's night and day. So good job. And yeah, so that's a very, very good question. The simple short answer is that there could be this meandering analysis within you, but as my father told me, your intuition always has a last word. So why does he say that? I told him, for example, I said, I didn't want to run for Bloc Montreal. My intuition told me not to do it. I have so many other responsibilities, but I wanted to poke the matrix just to see what would happen and see everyone trip out. So I said, I'm going to do it. But it was against what my intuition told me. And my father said, no, your intuition always has a last word. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I don't know that it's decision-making processes. What do I mean by that? Throughout my whole life, no matter what happened, it always worked out at the end. It always worked out. Never, so I have a broken foot 11 weeks before training camp with the Montreal Alouettes. The doctor says, you need surgery. And it's a Liz Frank injury. It's very hard to get, but you basically break your foot. And your ligaments are all messed up. And I survived training camp. And I won a championship with the Montreal Alouettes. And it just always works out. So for me to decide if I want to, for example, run for Bloc Montreal, it's not really a decision because I know it's going to work out. And I know we're there for the right reasons. So it's like, no matter what choice you make, it always ends up working out in the way that it should. And that's why, a lot of young people, say you're getting recruited to where you want to go to school. You go to University of Ottawa, University of Saskatchewan, you go to McGill. It doesn't really matter where you go, because your attributes, your attitude, and who you are is going to have the situation flourish in the way that you bring it. And I'll give you a very small, easy example. I'm with a friend yesterday. He stops at a red light and he's cursing at the red lights. I really hang out with him, but he asked me to hang out and said, okay. There's a red light. He's cursing at the red light. I said, what are you doing? He's like, I always get the red lights. I said, okay, it's kind of weird. Next stop sign, the next light. There's a walk for pedestrians horizontally and vertically on these busy streets. So they allow to cross diagonally, right? Just cursing at the pedestrians because they're crossing diagonally. And I says, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, oh, but they're crossing diagonally. Yes, because there's walks this way and this way. It's a busy intersection. Oh, no, you're cursing them out. Okay. Then the next light, it's a red light. He's like, oh, I look at the red lights. He's complaining. And I said, well, this guy's interesting. Then we are driving down St. Lawrence, going towards the Old Port, and a taxi starts to beep him, and according to the taxi, that he was shifting lanes, and the taxi literally turned into him as if he was going to run into my friend driving and starts cursing him out. And at the light, they both start yelling at each other and nearly got out the car to fight each other. And then we go and we park, and I said, you created that situation. From cursing out the pedestrians to the red light, you, even if it wasn't your fault in that lane, you created that because of your attitude. So why do I tell you that story is because it always works out if you wake up in the morning optimistic, you feel empowered, you feel like you're making a difference, no matter where you are, it works out. So what happens? Anastasia and I are sitting at the office, and I say, should we start Bloc Montreal? I don't know. I take my phone, I call La Presse, I say, tomorrow I'll be at the National Assembly to announce Bloc Montreal, and I just pitch, no press release, hang up. I just threw myself into the provincial election off of a phone call to La Presse. Why? Because I know that when we say, hey, we have a party based on ABC, people will gravitate towards it. And next thing you know, we're having a press conference on immigration. We have 12 different people from all walks of life, professors from the University of Montreal. We have bakers, we have cooks, we have accountants, we have soldiers, we have all kinds of people. And we build this mosaic of people, and we create this party. So when you're kind of, what I say in the book, like always on the right side of justice, it's bound to work out. So all that to say is that it's not about decision making. It's just a continuous faith, if you will. I don't use faith in the book, but it's faith that it's always going to work out in your favor, because as we say in the game, highly blessed and favored. So there's no qualms about what to do. And that's where it goes back into effortless effort, because it's not like when you're playing football or basketball or baseball or tennis, it's effortless effort because there's no decision making. And it's like dancing. My father says like, oh, the best soccer players know how to dance because it's just fluid. So that's why my father says dancing through life. And that's why the story in the book where my father says like, that's how you dance, boy, you're right. And like, so that's where it comes into the place, where it's not about decision making, but rather effortlessly moving through life, trusting that it all works out at the end because you're on the right side of history.
So now I want to change to a topic that's more political, but more so about the way politics works. So not looking at any specific party, but so in the book you write, I entered politics to change the system, but it turned out that the system was on autopilot, reproducing the same inequities with every passing election. Do you feel that much has changed at City Hall? Is it still on autopilot? And does this understanding lend insight into the definition of systemic racism?
Yeah, well, another good question. You should be working like your next whole person thing. Like, yeah, well, it's not just City Hall, right? You know, when you think about activists and the work that we do, you always wonder if we make an impact, because if you're fighting racial profiling for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years, and then you see it happen again, you ask yourself, okay, well, is what I'm doing making a difference? So from that perspective, we're always humbled in the work that we do. Is that what are we really doing, right? CBC, CTV, all the media outlets publish situations of racism so they can get clicks. You think that they're there to highlight, you, but it's like the pornography of like Black pain, right? It's not, they're not there to help you. They're there to get clicks. So you think you're making a difference by advancing public dialogue, but the media has their agenda. And then the police force has their agenda, and then the administration has their agenda. And you're like, okay, when do things change? And that's tough to, so it's tough to conceptualize like how we are acting or like how we're making a difference. So it's not just City Hall, it's the role of activism. It's, it's everything. And that's kind of why you aim for the top and shoot as high as you can, and create parties and try to carve out some territory and protect it in the democracy. That's what we spoke about before backstage, about we can't be a one-term party. We need to come back again and again. So that's where it goes back to, last but not least on this point, equality is a pursuit, not a destination. It's always going to be this constant pursuit, and you're going to inch the moral arc. At the end of the book, I say the moral arc of the universe is long with a bend towards justice. So little by little, you're going to inch it over time, and you hope that it's going to change. But I think this is what's going to happen. At one point, it's going to plateau, and I'll tell you why. Is that you can have the most diverse city hall in the history of Montreal, but what we say is the lion that lost its roar. So a whole bunch of visible minorities, quote unquote, activists, women of color, they're all elected, and it's, the most diverse city hall in the history of Montreal. And you look at the policies and you're like, you look what's happening in Montreal, you're like, this is just the same as all white squad. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same policies. So, which means that diversity at City Hall doesn't really mean anything. And then I was fighting for that for like 3 years. City Hall should be more diverse, because more diversity means we're going to get more equitable policies. A whole bunch of Black women get elected, and then there's like no sports center money. And you're like, what just happened? We were fighting for 2 decades to have a sports center in Montreal North. That's the epicenter of violence, the epicenter of the COVID-19 crisis. And then a whole bunch of Black women get elected. You hope that the budget is going to reflect a sports center in the epicenter of violence in Quebec. And then there's no sports center in the money, in the budget. And we know that sports equals engagement, equals not on the block, equals, who knows, maybe a professional athlete, equals stays in school. And you're like, where's the money in the budget? No, this is impossible. We have the most diverse city hall in the history of Montreal. How come there's no money for the poor neighborhood that we were all fighting for, and that you all said that you wanted? And some of them were actually executive directors and heads of organizations that promoted sports. And then they're elected, and then there's no money in the budget for the sports center. The lion and the lioness that lost their roar, it's to the zoo. And what happens is that's why it goes on autopilot. But this is what happens. We hope that there's going to be a Jody Wilson-Raybould who's going to say, you know what, I'm not going to stand for it. But look what happened to her, right? Then they get marginalized and excluded. Now she's like beating me in like on the book bestsellers list because like, she has a good story. No, but jokes aside, that you become crucified by the party, and then you lose your seat. So that's the big challenge of why it's on autopilot, is because if anyone speaks out against consensus and you don't conform, well then you're kicked out. So hopefully, and that's why we start our own parties, because if we start our own party, now we can decide the policy that we want to put forward and maintain our integrity. So everyone always says, oh, why don't you just join an existing party? I can't do that, because if I do, I have to follow a line, and if you don't, you're out. That's like a second book right there.
So, continuing on that theme of systemic racism, you write in your book that racism lives and breathes in silence. And so you wrote this about the inaction of Montreal city councillors in presenting a motion on systemic discrimination to force the OCPM to hold a public consultation. And I actually didn't know that. I wasn't aware or realized that that they could have actually saved you that work of collecting all the signatures, but that they didn't do it. And so can you speak a little bit more about that idea that racism lives and breathes in silence?
For sure, and it goes back to the other point, is that in the budget, it's not going to be written, we are going to underfund undeserved communities because they are undeserving. They're not going to write that. This is going to be a zero. or the line just won't be there. So racism lives and breathes in silence, is that you have to at times read between the lines because it's just omitted. So that's effectively it. At times, you know, to speak to your example, city council could have mandated this consultation, but we had to go do the work. For those of you that read the book, that citizen mobilization empowered, so they did us a favor. They empowered us. And today, this is the interesting part, is that today, well, effectively, for those of you that read the book, even if you didn't, we collected 15,000 or 22,000 signatures. We required the city of Montreal to hold a consultation on systemic racism. And what's very interesting is that 38 recommendations came from this consultation. And up until this very day, today there was a report about the advancements of those recommendations. So the work that we did 9 years ago, or excuse me, in 2019, is still being acted on now. But no one in the press conference is aware of why the commissioner has a job. She has a job to fight racism because of the 30 recommendations, because of the petition that we launched that binded them legally to have it. But you know what the beauty is? I don't tweet out, hey, the commissioner is there because of the work that we did, and Dominique Olivier, who's the head of the executive committee, was formerly the head of the OCPM, who oversaw the recommendations, and now she's there. We don't even need to say that. The work that we did has come to fruition. The city of Montreal is advancing, and you know, I could you know, make you know, carrots and apples in a blender for my baby for her to eat while the city of Montreal does the work that they need to do. So that's the beauty about activism, and the beauty about being humble in this struggle, if you will, is you do the job and then you let the next phase take its step. And so we're, you know, we'll see what happens. I have yet to read the news today, but we'll see what happens with all that.
So my final formal question is about a quote that really caught my eye. You write in your book that hate was fuel for inspiration. Now, for a lot of people, especially in the social media era, when they receive hate online or even in person, it can really kind of make them lose their footing a little bit. So for you, how did you transmute hate into fuel for good?
So that's a very good question. Now, I figured out that I did that with one particular scenario. It was my first debate with Denis Coderre, Valérie Plante. It was more like a dialogue with un groupe de jeunes, and it was organized by Le Devoir at le Musée des Beaux-Arts, and it was our first opportunity to share our policy with young people and with all Montrealers listening from Le Devoir that was, you know, ce qui était diffusé. And on my way there, I'm on a big seat. I feel confident. I have my suit and I feel great, you know, no tie, but I'm a little bit nervous. And I'm thinking, this is going to be interesting. You know, first time running for mayor. And then it dawned on me, because I have a few haters of people who want to see us tumble. And then, so the last 5% I needed to be fully comfortable on stage was knowing that there was a few haters that would have loved to see me stumble, that would have loved to see me just crumble under the pressure. And I'm like, if you think I'm gonna come on this stage and give you the satisfaction of even having one hiccup, oh, you got the wrong guy. And then it was mellifluous. It was perfect. So when you have people that hope for your downfall, it could be inspirational, but there's a kicker. You have to have 90% or whatever of anchoring that has to be positive energy. So imagine you have a car, you want to pump, you know, premium gas in your car. You don't want all your fuel to be based on the negative energy of other people, right? You need to have some clean fuel in your Ferrari. We're all Ferraris, right? Or Bentleys, whatever you want to be. Or Teslas for those of you that are eco-friendly. Whatever, the batteries are like, mined in like Congo or something, so it's not even like that. Anyhow, you get the point. So you want to have positive fuel in your in your body or in your psyche, as my father would say. So yes, hate can fuel you to do better, but it's a marginal percentage. Because if you're doing something just because you want to prove your doubters wrong, eventually it's going to wear and tear on you and you're going to crumble. So the inner core, the root has to be genuine, and comme ça, you could, you're going to have the stamina to last. And what's fascinating is that when I launched the consultation on systemic racism, people said, he's doing this because he lost, and he's doing this for personal satisfaction, and he's doing this to be in the media. And there was all like this kind of talk. This is like 2018. And like 2019 comes around and like, he's still doing it. Oh, okay. 2021 comes around, and oh my God, I'm getting tired from seeing this guy still run. 2022 comes around, oh my God, this guy's still going. Oh, well, maybe it's like, maybe it is authentic. It's like, yeah, maybe it is. So you have to have that positive anchor, that positive fuel, and that authenticity, and all those values that you hold dear to yourself. Those have to be true and real, because if it's not, the chink in the armor, you will expose yourself. Whether it's cracking under pressure during a campaign. Why do I keep mentioning campaigns for pressure as opposed to football? Because they are really hard to do. And you run them, many of them. So as long as your values are strong, if we wrap it up, the decision making is easy because you have faith that it's going to work out. And overall, that's not, the haters won't be the ones fueling you, or the negativity won't be the ones fueling you. And I'll say, I'll end on this, and how hate or negativity could be viewed in different ways. In the 50s and 60s, people of color, for example, were not allowed to drink from certain water fountains, right? We all know that. This is something that is obviously seen as a negative. Now, let me give you a clear example of one of the reasons why I created Bloc Montréal. Is because I was in talks, and I didn't put this in the book, and because I don't want to give too many political details. But some of you had asked me why Bloc Montréal. But this ties into some of our conversation. The Quebec Liberal Party, I said, I would love to join you. And over the period of a few months, they said, your policies are too focused on Montreal. There's no added value. They said, no, thank you. And I thought to myself, are they the gatekeepers of our democracy? If they tell me no, does that mean I can't run? And I thought back to, the water fountain situation. If someone told me in the 1960s, I can't drink from this fountain, or better yet, I can't vote. Now someone's selling me something similar indirectly in 2022. You're telling me that I can't vote or I can't run? What do you think I'm going to do? You all know me by now. See you at the National Assembly tomorrow, right? So sometimes it's not just the negative or the hate that fuels you. Sometimes you see the injustice, but that injustice could be viewed in a way that is anchored in justice per se, and that can advance you. So what that means is that it's not always going to be this positive fuel and the daisies and like the rainbows that will fuel you. Sometimes it's the concept of justice that fuels you. And then that's a fire that burns within you. And then that's where you get the energy and the stamina to keep going. Because gas alone does nothing. You need a spark. And that spark could be justice. And that's where we have that stamina and that focus to keep going. But you need to witness injustice in many ways. And so is the Liberal Party of Quebec the gatekeepers of our democracy? That's injustice. So what do? We spark the fuel and we keep going, and then that's what advances us. And last but not least, to give a simple last example regarding politics, people ask me, why do you run for mayor of Montreal? Or why do you run for Bloc Montreal? And the simple answer is, I had no food in my fridge growing up. So if you have no food in your fridge, you're like, there's no food in my fridge. My sports center is lacking in my high school. I lived in a small house. My dad's in social, and you make all these factors. The justice aspect of that could be the spark that fuels you. So it's not just about. So I always say justice is a key aspect that fuels me. And by the way, this is like a freestyle, and hence my journey towards justice. And I just made that connection now, and that's kind of the ongoing pursuit.
Those are the end of my formal questions, and yeah, I mean, I read the book, and it was kind of like, as I said when I began speaking, it was fascinating just to see all the aspects of your life that I didn't know, you know, just from our interactions, and to kind of get that deeper insight into what created you as a leader. And I think it's going to be a very inspiring read, especially I think for people who want that hope, who really need to see an example of somebody who is able to overcome so much and to actually create not just a kind of a legacy for themselves, but actually for the city and even the province. So I found it to be a very amazing read. And I just hope everyone gets a chance to read it, and that it stays on the bestseller, and you know, on to many, many more successes.
Thank you so much. And if there's any questions in the crowd, I'm happy to take any. And I don't know what we have for time. Yeah. I guess there's 7:57.
Your father was very inspirational to me. That beginning of how the wild stuff, tell us a little bit more the advice he had child, how
Yeah, my dad, and I think I'm pretty sure I put this in the book. He would say, "Shut up and listen." Right? That was like, the key advice. Stay home and read. The simple things that you look back and you're like, yeah, he was right. And for those of you that read it, I do fall off track. And football saves me. I see a role model, 5'11", 180 pounds, looks like me, and I'm like, oh, I could do that. And it's interesting, your parents, because there's not more kids here, your parents are basically always right, and the simple things, the simple advice. But I would say the biggest thing, and right now I am a parent, and the easiest thing for me, my father says, I talk about this in the book. The story about how they said I was going to become a Swami by 40. I don't know if those of you read the book, it was the same as Swami by 40. Swami like a guru, a guidance, a teacher. And at the end of the book, I said, I'm not a Swami, I'm a Kshatriya, I'm a fighter. And the thing with Kshatriyas and fighters, they lead by example. So my father was able to lead me by example, to a certain extent, through my academic and through the integrity and the power that he outlined. But now as a dad with baby Bella, for those of you who are lucky enough to meet her, she's so charismatic and wild. So now I don't have to say much. My father would often say, true power is walking in a room, not needing to say anything, and your presence speaks for itself. So my baby's gonna be doing her homework. Daddy has 5 degrees, right? It's setting the standard of being a role model that inspires me also at a very local level vis-a-vis my daughter. So my father led by example in his own way, and I am gonna lead by example in my own way for for my baby and like what I've done, and she comes to all my book launches most of the time and all the events, so she already knows what's up. Yes.
Practically the same line you said
Yeah.
and also about how the ashram supported you. Not amazing, but you this goes back to yeah. Looking at the community. Single mother, stuff like that. How important is having a community?
And I would almost say very, one of my characteristics, for those who know me, I'm kind of like spontaneous, impulsive. I would jump right away and say, I don't think there is very much community in the city. I think it's a lot more difficult in cities to have a sense of community, right? I'm lucky because I grew up in the country. When you go up in the country, I don't know why, but the community seemed so strong and interconnected. And I think it's also a question of survival, right? When you're in the country, you can't be isolated. It's kind of hard to pick vegetables and till the land when you're all alone. So, I think I read, a lot long ago, a recent study show that people are increasingly isolated, particularly in cities, which is odd because we're millions, right? So I'm lucky because I have this village to raise me, but no one ever said, oh, a city to raise you. Cities are cold and concrete blocks and concrete jungles. I have a village that raises me. So I'm extremely fortunate in that regard. So my parents aren't there for the first 9 years of my life, very much. They're in and out, but I am raised by this community, this tight-knit community. And what's interesting about football is the ultimate team sport. And I talk about, I think I have a line in the book that says, like, all of a sudden I needed like a whole football team to like get me back on track and to raise me. So cities are more and more challenging, right? A single parent mother who lives in the city, works multiple jobs, and kids are having trouble at school, lack attention, lack resources. And that's why it comes back to having those sports centers, those mentors, those coaches. And in the book, I talk a lot about my coaches, my head coaches at Ottawa U, because that provides you with guidance and support. But many of you know this already, right? And the sense of communities and cities are extremely challenging. And invisible minorities, to use the term, for example, just in the Black community, there are over 200 different ethnicities, right? Congolese, right? Haitian, Jamaican. So it's so diverse that it's not a monolithic or like a homogeneous group. This is a very diverse group. So that's another challenge to think that, oh, all these groups will come together and somehow build a home for all. And speaking of home, that's the whole point about running for office, and I talk about it in the book, is like, okay, can we build a place that we can feel at home, that you can call home? And I would end on saying the positive aspect is sometimes we have a common theme or a common denominator that binds us together. So if there's a bill like Bill 21 that we deem unjust, all of a sudden we're marching together, we're eating together, we're talking together, and we're coming together. Because that's how we're going to survive against an infringing government. So we could find silver linings in society, but I think we have a lot of work to do as communities to build a place we can call home. And to your point, to create a sense of community. I think we have work to do. We say it as a society, especially the liberals, oh, Montreal's a mosaic of all these, or Canada's a mosaic of all these different nationalities that come together. But we see a ton of isolation, and last but not least on that point, intergenerational. So the older population who are minorities, the elderly, are increasingly isolated from younger generations and society at large. And that's exacerbated by their socioeconomic and racial identities. So that's increasingly there as well. And that's why libraries are important, right? These are places where people can come and connect, and programs for different groups of individuals to come together. And that's why this library is so important. And the more you go to these impoverished neighborhoods, the less libraries, sports centers, coming back to the damn sports center in Montreal, the less infrastructure we see. And that's why in the book, if there's one policy point, it's kind of like this sports center. But yeah, that's a great question. That's like I got like 3 books tonight. Yes.
Thank you very much for this. I said as I got in that I haven't read a book in a long time. And this was just one of those sorts of books where you're just like, all right, I'm going. It's 4:49 in the morning and I'm Scottish background, I'm from where I grew up. I got, you don't speak England here, like, but as a white person who has how can I on the daily do some things to advance voices that are not heard? I think I've got community or all the other communities that still need lots of voices to amplify.
For sure. And you know, it's interesting, like Holness is actually a Scottish last name. And like, so yeah, we have more common.
Well, that's actually great up in 2009. Waiting for someone, and the Grey Cup was passing through, and I was like, so actually, that's before you.
No, 2009 or no. So that. Okay, and what year did I win the Grey Cup? Yeah, what year did I win the Grey Cup? Did I win 22 or 29? Too many concussions. No, yeah, 2010. You're right. You're right. How did it feel?
It was exciting. My picture.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, back to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So allyship is extremely important. The easiest way would be to volunteer, right? The easiest way is volunteering, and behind the scenes is very interesting. So, you know, I mentioned, you know, so in the acknowledgements, I acknowledge Anastasia Pomarez, who's here. There's Helen Hayes, I mentioned in the book, right? So the person behind the scenes of our election, who did basically everything, was Helen Hayes, who's a privileged white woman, but I said it in the book, like this ally was on point. And so there's a lot of different ways to be an ally, right? And also, you know, support is great. So like, we as people of color could also be allies. So for example, like the Armenian genocide, right? So we all go and support Tahoe when there's an Armenian genocide event, and then we're all there. So it's not just white people have power and they're able to be allies. It's also people of color are able to be allies in our own regard. And why do I say that? Because that shifts the identity to say white people have power and we don't have power, and like we kind of need allies. It's more so anyone can be an ally, but the best way to be an ally is to volunteer and to then provide direct support. But it's not necessarily openly, directly saying, hey, I'm an ally, like I'm helping you and I'm empowering your voice. It's more like, we need to go put up posters, and it's like 11:30 at night, and you got a car and like some snippers, and like you're gonna go do it, and no one's really gonna know about it, but someone's gonna be like, hey, you have a Montreal Royale shirt, you're putting up posters, and like, so the allyship is something that's more subtle, and I feel like in the equity, diversity, and inclusion world, it's like literally like white people being like, I'm an ally, and like I'm helping you out, and I'm empowering your voice. So it's something that's more indirect, if you will, and genuine. And that's how I see it, but I'm sure there's many ways to see it. So if ever you want to like, but sometimes just showing up, you want to come to Armenian genocide event and you just show up and you're like, hey, like I'm actually good at photography, so I'm going to be taking pictures of you guys and I'll send them. Helping any way they can, like baking cookies. We're easy to please. Yeah, the person. Yeah.